Hi there, everyone. My name is John. I'm going to be walking you through cluster and multi-stage sampling today. First, let's take a look at cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is a form of random selection, and it's employed when people are already divided into arbitrary groups. So let's say a researcher wants to focus the research on university-age students like you all are doing. Rather than sampling from the entire population of the United States, which would result in a lot of wasted effort on the researcher's part, they can instead focus on smaller clusters such as universities where their population of interest is more likely to reside. A few examples of common clusters employed by researchers are things such as schools, workplaces, universities, etc. But what does cluster sampling exactly look like? First, clusters of participants within a population of interest are randomly selected. Then all the individuals in each selected cluster are used. Let's give you an example so you can more easily see what this would look like in research. Let's use your current research as an example, but let's say rather than focusing just on students at CSUN, you instead want to expand your research to cover all students in California universities. First, you'd have to identify the population of interest you want to focus on. In this case, it would be college-age students. Then you would have to identify the clusters you would want to focus on. In this situation, you would want to focus on universities in California. Then, let's say you randomly select from those universities. You would then sample from all the students in those randomly selected universities. So let's put this all together so you can more easily see it. Step one would be identifying your population of interest. Then you would identify the clusters you want to focus on. Then you would randomly select from those clusters, and then you would sample from all the individuals within those clusters. Again, applying this to your research as an example, your population of interest in this situation would be all university-age students in California. The clusters you would identify would be all universities within California. Then you would randomly select from those clusters, and then you would sample from all the students in those randomly selected clusters. Now let's take a look at multi-stage sampling. Multi-stage sampling is another form of random selection. And before we get into it, an easy way to keep the two distinct in my mind is that multi-stage sampling simply adds another step to cluster sampling. So rather than the single random sample used in cluster sampling, multi-stage sampling employs two random samples. The first random sample is random sampling from the clusters, and then step two is randomly sampling from the people within those clusters. So let's use the same example to demonstrate the slight difference between multi-stage and cluster sampling. Again, you would identify your population of interest, then you would identify the clusters you would want to focus on, then you would randomly select from those clusters. But where multi-stage sampling differentiates is that rather than using all participants like in cluster sampling, you would then randomly sample from that smaller subset of the population. So let's give you another overview. First, population of interest is identified. Then the clusters you want to focus on are identified. Then those clusters are randomly sampled. And then from within those random sample of clusters, you're going to randomly select from that population. So again, using your research as an example, you would first identify your population of interest, which would be university-age students, the cluster you would want to focus on, which would be universities within California. Then you would randomly sample from those universities, and then you would randomly sample from those student bodies to get your sample population. Now let's compare and contrast the two really quickly, just so you can see the differences and similarities between them. First and foremost, both cluster and multi-stage sampling are forms of random sampling, so you'll be able to extrapolate your results to a larger population. Similarly, both start by identifying your population of interest, then both move on to identifying the clusters you want to focus on, then you randomly select from those clusters, but in cluster sampling, you're going to be sampling from all the people within those clusters, whereas within multi-stage sampling, you're going to be randomly sampling from that population within those clusters. There's a brief overview of cluster and multi-stage sampling. I hope that helps separate the two in your mind so you can more easily differentiate them. Thank you for watching.